The council chamber was silent as the old alien walked toward the center platform. His name was, and he was the last survivor of the Battle of Sigma Reach. His scales had turned gray with age, and his 4 eyes were clouded with memories he wished he could forget. The counselors watched him with great interest. They had waited 50 years to hear his testimony. Counselor pressed a button on her desk, and a soft blue light appeared around. This light would record everything he said for the historical archives. She leaned forward in her seat and spoke in a gentle voice. "You have been brought here to share your experience with humanity. The galaxy is debating whether to allow humans further expansion into contested space. Your testimony may help us understand what we are dealing with. Please, begin when you are ready." Stood still for a long moment. His clawed hands trembled slightly. Even after all these years, the memories still hurt. He took a deep breath and began to speak. "I was young when the war started. I was a sensor officer on the flagship Dominance. We were proud in those days. Our empire had conquered 17 species across the galaxy. We believed we were the greatest warriors the universe had ever seen. And then we met the humans." He paused and looked around the chamber. Hundreds of alien delegates from dozens of species were watching him. Some of them had never seen a human. They did not understand what they were asking about. "When our scouts first reported on humanity, we laughed. We actually laughed. The reports said humans were soft creatures with thin skin and weak bodies. They had no natural armor, no claws, no venom. They were short, barely 100 years if they were lucky. They needed to sleep for 8 hours every day. They could die from a simple infection. On paper, they were one of the weakest species we had ever encountered." His voice grew quieter. "We thought they would fall within a single rotation cycle. We were fools." He explained that the High Command had chosen a small human colony called New Montana as their first target. It was a mining world on the edge of human space, home to about 50,000 civilians. The humans had only one ship defending it, a medium cruiser called the USS Steadfast. "We sent 40 warships," said, 40 of our finest vessels against one human cruiser. We believed it would be a simple demonstration of our power. We wanted to show the humans that resistance was pointless. We wanted them to surrender their entire species without a real fight." The old alien closed his eyes. He could still see the stars of that day, still feel the vibration of the ship beneath his feet. "As we approached the colony, we received a transmission from the human ship. The captain was a woman named Marsh. She held the rank of lieutenant commander. I remember her voice clearly, even now. It was calm and steady, like she was discussing the weather instead of facing 40 warships with a single cruiser. Repeated her words from memory. "Fleet, this is Lieutenant Commander Marsh of the USS Steadfast. You are approaching human territory with hostile intent. Turn back now. This is your only warning." A few of the counselors shifted in their seats. One of them, a young diplomat, raised a hand. "She warned you, even though she was completely outnumbered." Nodded slowly. "Yes, she warned us. One ship against 40, and she told us to turn back. We thought she was insane. War Commander Oss, my superior, ordered her transmission to be played on all our ships so everyone could hear. The crews laughed. I laughed too. We thought it was the funniest thing we had ever heard." He fell silent for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was heavy with regret. "We stopped laughing very quickly." Described how the fleet had moved into attack formation. Their ships were larger and more heavily armed than the Steadfast. Their shields were stronger. Their weapons were more powerful. By every measure of military strength, the humans had no chance. "We opened fire," he said. "Our plasma cannons tore into the Steadfast's hull. We watched pieces of the ship break away and drift into space. Their shields failed within minutes. Their engines were damaged. They were dying, and we were barely scratched." He stopped and took a shaky breath. "And then something happened that I will never understand. The Steadfast did not retreat. It did not surrender. It did not try to escape. Instead, it accelerated. It turned directly toward our flagship and increased speed. The council chamber was completely silent now. Every eye was focused on. I was at my sensor station when I realized what was happening. I screamed a warning to War Commander, but it was too late. The Steadfast crashed directly into our docking bay. The impact killed hundreds of our crew instantly, and then Marsh detonated her ship's reactor. His voice cracked. She turned her dying ship into a bomb. She killed herself and her entire crew just to hurt us. The explosion crippled the Dominance and killed War Commander Oss. Our fleet lost its command ship in the first 5 minutes of the battle. He looked up at the counselors with his old, tired eyes. That was the moment I first understood something was wrong. Every species we had ever fought followed the same basic rules. When you are losing, you retreat. When your ship is dying, you evacuate. When victory is impossible, you surrender and live to fight another day. These are logical responses. These are the responses of creatures who want to survive. Shook his head slowly. Humans do not follow these rules. They do not retreat when they are losing. They do not surrender when victory is impossible. They fight until they cannot fight anymore, and then they find a way to keep fighting. Marsh knew she was going to die. She chose to make her death mean something. He pointed a clawed finger at the counselors. Before that day, I thought bravery meant facing danger without fear. The humans taught me a different definition. Bravery means being afraid, being certain you will die and fighting anyway. Marsh was afraid. I am sure of it, but she flew her ship into our flagship and killed herself to protect her people. Lowered his hand and spoke his next words very carefully. That was only the beginning. The worst was yet to come, because as our flagship burned, we detected something on our sensors. Human. They had launched before the collision, and they were heading toward our surviving ships. He looked around the silent chamber one final time. The humans were not just willing to die. They were planning to board our vessels and continue fighting. And that, counselors, is when I first felt something I had never felt before in my life. I felt fear. Continued his testimony before the council. His voice had grown steadier as he spoke, but his eyes were distant. He was no longer in the chamber. He was back on that burning ship 50 years ago, watching his world fall apart. After the Steadfast destroyed our flagship, everything became chaos. The Dominance was crippled and drifting. Fires burned in every section. Our communication systems were damaged, and we could not coordinate with the rest of the fleet. And through all of this, the human were approaching. He explained that they had never faced a boarding action before. Their wars were fought ship to ship, at great distances. The idea of soldiers fighting inside a spacecraft was strange to them. They were not prepared for what came next. The humans cut through our airlocks with plasma torches. They moved in small groups, 5 or 6 soldiers at a time. They wore heavy armor and carried weapons I had never seen before, and they were fast, so terribly fast. Described how he had been trapped in a corridor near the sensor room when the first humans arrived. He had hidden behind a damaged console, watching through the smoke as the aliens he had mocked just hours before proved exactly how wrong he had been. The first human I saw up close was a man named Danny Reeves. He held the rank of sergeant. I learned his name later from the records. At the time, I only knew him as a nightmare made real. The old's voice trembled as he remembered. Sergeant Reeves had been injured during the boarding. His left arm was broken. I could see the bone pushing against his skin. Any with such an injury would have retreated to receive medical attention. It is the logical thing to do. A warrior cannot fight effectively when he is wounded. Paused and looked directly at the counselors. Danny Reeves did not retreat. He held his rifle with one hand and kept fighting. He moved through the corridor like a predator, checking corners and shooting with perfect accuracy. His broken arm hung uselessly at his side, and he ignored it completely. It was as if pain meant nothing to him. The council chamber was silent. Several delegates had stopped taking notes and were simply staring at the old alien. I had studied human biology before the war, continued. I knew that humans feel pain more intensely than most species. Their nervous systems are extremely sensitive. A broken bone should have caused unbearable agony. But Sergeant Reeves fought for 3 more hours with that injury. 3 hours. He only stopped when a medic finally forced him to accept treatment. Then spoke about another human he had encountered that day. Her name was Amy, and she was a corporal who served as a combat medic. He had watched her from his hiding spot, too afraid to move or make a sound. Corporal was dragging a wounded soldier to cover when I saw her. The soldier had been shot in the leg and could not walk. She was pulling him across the floor with one arm while firing her pistol with the other. And then she was hit. The old alien's voice became quiet. The first shot struck her shoulder. She stumbled but did not fall. She kept dragging her wounded friend. The second shot hit her side. I saw blood spray across the wall. She made a sound, a small grunt of pain, and she kept moving. She did not stop until she had pulled the wounded soldier behind a metal barrier. Only then did she look at her own injuries. Shook his head in disbelief, even after all these years. She bandaged herself with one hand while keeping her pistol aimed at the corridor with the other. She was bleeding badly. She should have been screaming in agony. Instead, she looked annoyed. That is the only word I can use to describe her expression. She looked annoyed, like the bullets had interrupted something important. He told the council that he had remained hidden for several hours as the humans secured the ship. He listened to them communicating with each other through their helmet radios. Their voices were calm and professional. They called out positions and targets like they were discussing a training exercise, not a battle to the death. I heard one soldier report that he had taken 3 casualties in his squad. His voice did not change at all. He simply stated the facts and asked for reinforcement. Another soldier replied that she would be there in 2 minutes. She sounded like she was walking to a meeting, not running through a burning warship to help her dying friends. Explained that this calmness terrified him more than anything else. When fight, we roar and scream. We show our enemies our rage and our strength. It is how warriors behave, but the humans were quiet. They killed us efficiently and without emotion. They did not hate us. They did not enjoy hurting us. They simply did their job and moved on to the next target. He described the moment when the battle finally ended. The surviving on the Dominance had surrendered after realizing they could not win. The humans gathered them in a large cargo bay and kept them under guard. I expected them to execute us, admitted. That is what we would have done. Prisoners are a burden in war, but the humans did not kill us. They gave us water and food. They treated our wounded. One of their medics, a young woman with kind eyes, bandaged a cut on my head even though I had been trying to kill her people just hours before. The old alien fell silent for a moment, collecting his thoughts. I asked her why she was helping me. She looked at me with confusion like my question made no sense. She said, "You're hurt. It's my job to help people who are hurt." I told her I was her enemy. She shrugged and said, "You're a prisoner now, not an enemy. There's a difference." Looked up at the council with his 4 tired eyes. That conversation has stayed with me for 50 years. The humans had every reason to hate us. We had attacked their colony without warning. We had tried to conquer their people. And yet this young medic treated me with kindness simply because I was hurt and she knew how to help. He raised a clawed hand to make his point. This is what makes humans so dangerous. They are not mindless killers. They do not fight because they enjoy violence. They fight because they believe they are protecting something important. And when the fighting is over, they can switch off their aggression like turning off a light. One moment they are soldiers, killing everything in their path. The next moment they are healers, caring for the wounded. His voice grew heavy, with a mixture of fear and respect. I have fought many species in my life. Some were cruel, some were honorable, some were cowardly. but I have never met a species that could be all of these things at once. The humans can be kind and gentle and then become terrifying killers in an instant, and then become kind again when the battle ends. That ability to change, to adapt, to become whatever the situation requires, that is what makes them so frightening. He lowered his hand and spoke his final words of this part of his testimony. The battle for the dominance lasted 6 hours. More than 2,000 died. The humans lost 43 soldiers, 43 against 2,000, and they won. But that was only the first battle. The war was just beginning, and the worst moments of my life were still ahead of me. Took a moment to drink some water before continuing his testimony. The council waited patiently. They could see that these memories were painful for him, but they needed to hear everything. The fate of the galaxy might depend on understanding humanity. After the battle in space, the surviving forces retreated to a moon called Seven. It was a frozen world covered in ice and snow. We had a communications relay station there, buried deep underground. The station was heavily fortified. We had over 1,000 soldiers defending it, along with heavy weapons and plenty of supplies. We believed we would be safe there. The old alien shook his head slowly. We should have kept running. He explained that the human survivors from the battle numbered fewer than 200. They had lost most of their forces in the fighting. Logic said they should wait for reinforcements. Logic said they should rest and recover. Logic said that 200 soldiers could not defeat 1,000 defenders in a fortified position. The humans did not follow logic. They followed us to Seven. They landed there remaining on the frozen surface and began marching toward our station. We watched them on our sensors and could not believe what we were seeing. Described the human commander, a man named Sam who held the rank of captain. He had taken command after most of the senior officers died in the space battle. He was 34 years old, which was young by human standards for such responsibility. Captain sent us a message, recalled. His voice was polite but firm. He said we had 12 hours to surrender. He said this was our only warning. He said that if we did not surrender, his soldiers would come inside and take the station by force. The council chamber stirred with murmurs. One of the delegates, a tall with blue skin, spoke up. He threatened to attack a fortified position with a force 5 times smaller than the defenders. Was he insane? Almost smiled, but there was no humor in his expression. We asked ourselves the same question. Our commander at the time was my brother L. He was a proud warrior who had won many battles. He thought Captain was bluffing. He thought the humans were trying to scare us into surrendering because they knew they could not win a real fight. The old alien paused. My brother was wrong. He described the 12 hours of waiting. The soldiers prepared their defenses and checked their weapons. They joked about the foolish humans who thought they could threaten a superior force, admitted that he had laughed along with them, even though a small part of him felt afraid. When the 12 hours ended, the attack began. The humans did not come from one direction. They came from everywhere. They had spent the waiting time digging tunnels through the ice, finding weak points in our defenses, and positioning themselves for a coordinated assault. His voice grew as he continued. They moved through our station like ghosts. They knew exactly where to go and what to target. They destroyed our communications first, cutting us off from each other. Then they took out our power systems, plunging entire sections into darkness. And then they came for us, room by room, corridor by corridor. He spoke about the fighting in the tunnels. They had the advantage of numbers, but the humans had the advantage of determination. They fought in tight formations, covering each other's movements and never leaving a soldier behind. I saw a young human woman during the battle. Her name was Tors and she was only 19 years old. She held the rank of private first class, which meant she was one of the lowest-ranking soldiers in their army. She should have been in school, learning and growing. Instead, she was fighting in a frozen tunnel against enemies twice her size. Closed his eyes. Private Tors and her squad entered the section where my brother was commanding the defense. There was a terrible fight. I was not there, but I saw the aftermath. My brother was a skilled warrior. He had killed many enemies in his life, but Tors was faster and more determined than anything he had ever faced. The old alien's voice cracked. They killed each other. My brother stabbed her through the chest with his blade. She should have died instantly, but she did not die. With the blade still in her body, she activated her grenades and held onto my brother. The explosion killed them both and destroyed the command center. The council chamber was completely silent. Several delegates looked disturbed by the story. Others seemed unable to believe it. She was 19 years old, repeated. A child by human standards, and she traded her life to complete her mission without hesitation. She made sure that if she was going to die, she would take her killer with her. That is not the action of a normal soldier. That is the action of someone who believes in something greater than themselves. He wiped his eyes with a shaky hand and continued. The station fell in 6 hours. 6 hours to defeat 1,000 defenders with only 200 attackers. The humans lost 80 soldiers in the assault. We lost over 900. The survivors, including myself, were captured and taken prisoner. Describe the aftermath of the battle. The humans had won, but they did not celebrate. They walked through the destroyed station in silence, collecting their dead and carrying them to a makeshift morgue. He watched Captain personally carry the body of Tors out of the rubble. The captain was crying, said quietly. This man who had just won an impossible victory, who had defeated a force 5 times his size, stood in the snow and wept for a 19-year-old soldier he had sent to her death. And then he dried his eyes, set his jaw, and gave orders for the next phase of the operation. The old alien looked at the counselors. That is what I remember most about that day. Not the fighting, not the death, not the blood and the screaming. I remember watching the human commander cry for his fallen soldiers and then immediately return to his duties. The humans feel everything we feel. They mourn their dead. They grieve their losses, but they do not let their grief stop them. They carry it with them and keep moving forward. Spread his clawed hands. We thought their emotions made them weak. We believed that creatures who felt so much pain and sadness could not be effective warriors. We were completely wrong. Their emotions do not weaken them. Their emotions give them strength. They fight harder because they feel more. They push themselves further because they know what they are fighting for. He lowered his hands and spoke with heavy certainty. When a loses a friend in battle, he becomes angry and reckless. When a human loses a friend in battle, she becomes focused and determined. She takes her grief and turns it into fuel. She fights not just for victory, but for the memory of those who have fallen. That is a kind of strength we never understood, and it nearly destroyed us, steadied himself before continuing. This part of his testimony was the hardest to tell. It was the part that had broken something inside him, the part that had shown him what humans truly were. After the relay station fell, a small group of us managed to escape. There were about 30 survivors who fled into the frozen wasteland of 7. We had some supplies, some weapons, and a desperate hope that the cold would protect us. He explained that 7 was one of the coldest moons in the sector. The surface temperature was far below freezing, and terrible storms swept across the ice fields every few days. The had evolved on a warm planet. They hated the cold, but they could survive it for short periods with proper equipment. We believed the humans would not follow us. They came from a planet called Earth, which has a moderate climate. Our intelligence told us that humans are sensitive to extreme temperatures. We thought the cold would kill them if they tried to chase us across the ice. Paused and let out a bitter laugh. We were wrong again. The humans sent a team of 30 soldiers after us, led by a lieutenant named Chris Vance. They left the warmth of the captured station and walked into the frozen hell of 7's surface. And they did not stop. The old alien described the pursuit that lasted for 2 weeks. The survivors moved as fast as they could, but they were tired and injured from the battle. The humans behind them were also tired and injured, but it did not seem to slow them down. "We watched them through our long-range scopes," said. "They wrapped themselves in any material they could find: sheets, blankets, pieces of insulation torn from equipment. They looked like walking bundles of cloth, stumbling through the snow, but they kept moving." He shook his head in amazement. "The temperature dropped to levels that should have killed them. I watched them huddle together at night, sharing their body heat in shifts. Some of them slept while others stayed awake to keep the group warm. They took turns, so no one froze while sleeping. It was a simple system, but it required incredible discipline and trust." Told the council about the human casualties during the pursuit. "3 of them died from the cold. I saw it happen through my scope. A soldier would collapse in the snow and the others would gather around him. They would try to warm him, try to save him. When they realized he was dead, they would dig a hole in the ice with their hands and their knives. They would bury their friend and mark the grave with stones, and then they would keep marching." The council chamber was silent. Several delegates had tears in their eyes. "They buried their dead and kept coming," repeated. 3 soldiers died and the other 27 did not give up. They did not turn back. They did not decide that the mission was too costly. They said goodbye to their friends and continued the hunt. He spoke about the human medic who traveled with the pursuit team. Her name was Laura, and she was responsible for keeping the soldiers alive in impossible conditions. "I watched her perform surgery in the middle of a blizzard," said. "One of the soldiers, a man named Nick, had developed a serious infection in his leg. The wound was turning bad and he needed immediate medical attention, but they were days away from any proper facility." The old alien's voice was filled with disbelief. "Medic heated a knife over a small fire and used it to cut away the infected flesh. She had no anesthesia, no proper tools, no sterile environment. The soldier was awake the entire time. He bit down on a piece of leather and made no sound while she cut into his leg." Looked at the counselors. "Do you understand what I am telling you? A human let another human cut into his flesh with a hot knife while fully conscious. He did not scream. He did not beg her to stop. He trusted her to save his life, and she trusted him to endure the pain. And the next day, that soldier got up and rejoined the march. He walked on that leg for another week." He continued describing the pursuit. "By the end of the first week, we realized something terrible. The humans were not chasing us to capture us. They were not chasing us to win the war. They were chasing us because that is what humans do. They do not stop. It is not a strategy. It is an instinct." Explained what he meant. "I studied human history after the war. I learned that humans evolved as persistence hunters on Earth. They would chase their prey for days, never stopping, never resting until the animal they were hunting collapsed from exhaustion. Other predators on Earth were faster and stronger, but humans could outlast anything. That instinct is still inside them. When they decide to catch something, they will follow it to the end of the universe." He described his growing terror during those 2 weeks. "Every morning we would wake up and check the horizon, and every morning we would see them. Tiny figures in the distance, walking toward us through the snow. They never got closer, but they never fell behind. They were always there, always following, always coming." The old alien's voice trembled. "We evolved for 400,000 years to become perfect predators. Our ancestors hunted and killed across a dozen worlds. We believed we were the ultimate warriors. But humans evolved on a death world where everything tried to kill them: the weather, the animals, the diseases, even their own planet. They did not become predators. They became something worse. They became survivors." Described the moment when his group finally could not run anymore. "We had been moving for 14 days. We were out of food and nearly out of water. Several of our group had died from exposure and exhaustion. The survivors were too weak to continue. We found a small cave in the ice and decided to make our final stand. He closed his eyes. I remember sitting in that cave, waiting for the humans to arrive. I was ready to die. I had accepted my fate, but I was also curious. I wanted to see them up close one more time. I wanted to understand what kind of creatures could push themselves through such terrible conditions just to catch us. Opened his eyes. They arrived at dawn on the 15th day. 27 soldiers walked out of the snow and surrounded our cave. They were thin and exhausted. Their faces were burned by the wind and their hands were covered in blisters. Some of them could barely stand, but their eyes were alert and their weapons were ready. He looked at the counselors. Lieutenant Vance stepped forward and spoke to us. His voice was hoarse from the cold, but his words were clear. He said, "You can surrender now, or we can do this the hard way. We did not walk for 2 weeks just to give up at the end. Your choice." Let out a slow breath. We surrendered. We were too tired and too afraid to fight anymore. And as the humans led us out of the cave and into the light, I finally understood what we had been fighting against. We had not been fighting soldiers. We had not been fighting warriors. We had been fighting something far more dangerous, creatures who refused to accept defeat, no matter the cost, stood in silence for a long moment. The council chamber waited. Everyone knew he was approaching the end of his testimony, and no one wanted to interrupt. After my capture on 7, I was transferred to a human prisoner camp. I expected cruelty. I expected torture. I expected to be treated the way we had treated our own prisoners in the past, but the humans surprised me again. He described the camp as clean and orderly. The prisoners received regular meals and medical care. They were allowed to exercise and socialize with each other. Guards watched them constantly, but there was no violence unless a prisoner started trouble first. I spent 3 years in that camp before the war ended. During that time, I was never beaten, never starved, never abused. The humans followed something they called rules of war, which told them how to treat prisoners with dignity. I had never heard of such rules before. In culture, prisoners were property to be used however the victor wished. Shook his head slowly. The humans could have punished us for everything we had done. We had attacked their colony without warning. We had killed their people and tried to enslave their species. They had every right to hate us, but they chose to treat us with honor instead. He told the council about the end of the war. The Empire had suffered defeat after defeat. The humans had not just defended their territory, they had pushed back, taking worlds and freeing the species that the Empire had conquered. The war ended when our leaders finally accepted that victory was impossible. They requested a meeting to discuss peace. The human commander who came to accept our surrender was an admiral named Ben. I was present at the ceremony as a witness. Described Admiral as a quiet man with gray hair and tired eyes. He was not tall or physically impressive. He did not wear fancy decorations or speak in a booming voice. He simply sat across the table from the leaders and listened to their terms. When the talking was finished and the documents were signed, Admiral stood up and shook hands with our High Commander. It is a human gesture of respect and agreement. Our commander did not know what to do, so he simply stood there while gripped his hand. The old alien paused. I looked into his eyes during that moment. I wanted to see hatred there. I wanted to see triumph or cruelty or gloating, something that would help me understand these creatures who had defeated us so completely. He fell silent for a long moment. I saw nothing. His eyes were calm and patient. He was not happy about the war ending because he had never wanted the war to begin. He was not proud of his victory because he took no joy in the deaths of his enemies. He was simply finished. The job was done and now he could rest. Looked at the counselors. That is what terrifies me most about humans. They do not hate us. They do not enjoy killing us. They simply do what is necessary and they do not stop until it is done. When the task is complete, they put down their weapons and go home to their families. They feel no need for revenge or domination. They just want to live their lives in peace. He raised a clawed finger. But if you threaten that peace, if you endanger the people and places they love, they will become the most dangerous creatures in the galaxy. They will sacrifice everything to protect what matters to them. They will burn your worlds and weep while doing it. And when it is over, they will offer you mercy if you are willing to accept it. Took a deep breath. I have spent 50 years studying humanity since the war ended. I have read their history. I have learned about their world wars and their genocides. I have seen their capacity for terrible cruelty. But I have also seen their art and their music and their love for each other. I have seen parents sacrifice everything for their children and strangers risk their lives to save people they have never met. He spread his hands wide. Humans are not monsters. They are something far more complicated. They contain both light and darkness in equal measure. They can be kind and cruel, brave and cowardly, generous and selfish. They are capable of the greatest acts of heroism and the worst acts of evil. And that is what makes them so dangerous. You never know which version of humanity you will face until it is too late. Counselor spoke up. We have called you here to advise us on whether humanity should be allowed to expand into contested space. Based on your experience, what is your recommendation? The old alien laughed bitterly. You ask me as if it matters what you decide. It does not matter. If you allow humanity to expand, they will do so peacefully if you let them. They will trade with you and form alliances and become your partners. But if you oppose them, if you try to stop them by force, they will fight. And they will win. He walked slowly toward the edge of the platform. I have given you my testimony. I have told you everything I know about humans in battle. Now let me give you my advice. Do not make enemies of humanity. Not because they are evil, but because they are good at being your enemy. They will outlast you. They will outfight you. They will sacrifice more and endure more and push harder than you ever thought possible. And when you finally break, they will offer you peace and wonder why you did not accept it in the first place. Turned to leave, but a young delegate stopped him. She was barely old enough to hold her position. Her eyes were full of questions. Wait, she called out. After everything they did to your people, after everything you experienced, do you trust them? Can humanity ever truly be trusted? The old stood still. The question hung in the air of the silent chamber. Trust is a complicated thing, said slowly. The humans killed my brother. They destroyed my fleet. They conquered my people. I should hate them for the rest of my days. He turned to look at the young delegate. But they also buried their dead beside ours on that frozen moon. They marked our graves with the same stones they used for their own fallen soldiers. When I was injured and bleeding in a corridor, a human medic stopped to help me even though I had been trying to kill her friends just hours before. When I was a prisoner, they fed me and clothed me and treated me with dignity. Walked slowly toward the door of the chamber. I do not know if humanity can be trusted, he said. But I know they are capable of honor. I know they can show mercy to their enemies and kindness to strangers. Whether that is enough to build a lasting peace, that is for your generation to discover. I have said everything I came to say. He reached the door and paused one final time. Remember my words, young one. Remember the story of Marsh, who flew her ship into certain death to protect her people. Remember Tors, who was 19 years old and gave her life to complete her mission. Remember the soldiers who walked through frozen hell for 2 weeks because they refused to let their enemies escape. These are the people you are dealing with. Treat them with respect and they will return it. Treat them as enemies and may the stars have mercy on you. Walked through the door and disappeared into the corridor beyond. The council chamber remained silent for a long time. The delegates looked at each other, uncertain of what to say or do next. Finally, Counselor spoke. I believe we have much to discuss. This session will continue tomorrow. For now, let us all go home and think carefully about what we have heard today. The delegates rose from their seats and filed out of the chamber. Outside, the sun was setting over Prime, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Somewhere far away, across the vast emptiness of space, the humans were going about their lives, building, creating, loving, dreaming. They had no idea that their fate was being discussed by aliens who feared them. And if they had known, they probably would not have cared. They were too busy living to worry about what others thought of them. That, perhaps, was the most human thing of all.